With the recent patch and the changes made to Knight's Resolve, today I want to show you a way you can maximize your damage in Elden Ring on any weapon you want to use. And this is done through utilizing several stackable buffs. So let's just get started. The first thing you need to do is get the Commander's Standard Halberd, which is a weapon dropped by Commander O'Neill in the middle of Caelid Rot Swamp. This halberd has a unique skill that grants a decent boost to both your attack and defense for about 30 seconds. If you don't have the weapon, you can use the Golden Vow incantation, which boosts your damage and defense, and it lasts for 90 seconds, but it provides a little less damage and defense than the halberd's weapon art. One more thing, only one buff could be applied at a time. The next thing you need is a low-weight weapon, a katana, or any weapon that can be slotted with a seppuku Ash of War, because this Ash of War can inflict blood loss on yourself. You don't need to worry about upgrading these weapons or anything. They're just going to be as your second and third slot for your weapons, and their only purpose is to buff your damage. For your headgear, you have two choices here. You can either use the white mask, which increases your damage by 10% when you inflict blood loss on enemies or on yourself. Or you can use the mushroom crown, which also increases your damage by 10% if you or an enemy gets poisoned. As far as the talismans go, first you need the Rotten Wing Spear Talisman. This one boosts your damage with successive attacks. The second one is the Millicent Talisman, which does the same thing, and it stacks with the Rotten Wing Talisman. So as long as you're attacking and you keep your combos up, your damage is going to keep going up until a certain point. I was able to get both of these talismans in a single playthrough by completing Millicent questline and then killing her before she gives you the needle, but this was prior to the latest patch. The third talisman to use is the Kindred Rod Exaltation, which boosts your damage by 20% when you or an enemy gets poisoned, and it stacks with a 10% from the Mushroom Crown. And the fourth talisman is the Lord of Blood Exaltation, which boosts your damage by 20% when you get hit with blood loss or inflict blood loss on someone else. And this one stacks with the 10% from the white mask. I'm going to do a little showcase. So now I'm going to use seppuku to inflict blood loss on myself. As you can see, my damage goes up from 556 to 734. Now let's apply a Rallying Standard, and you can see that the buffs are already stacking. Now I'm at 881, but we're not done yet. Next, you need two consumables. One, the Raw Dumpling, which you will use to poison yourself to get the buffs and then cleanse it. This way, the poison damage buff will apply to you, but you won't be taking any poison damage. This kind of gives you control of when you want to increase your damage. You can easily farm these by joining co-op areas that have those big jar dudes. They seem to always drop them when you kill them. So areas like Stormvale or the Academy. Otherwise, if you don't have the Raw Dumplings, you don't have to use them. You can use poison weapons, incantation, or dragon rot breath. Anything that will inflict poison or rot on enemies. The second consumable is a craftable perfume. It's the Blood Boil perfume, which I noticed a lot of people seem to overlook, but it provides a huge damage boost that stacks with the previous buffs, about 30% more damage. However, it makes you take extra damage, and this buff lasts for about 60 seconds. Now let's apply all of these buffs. First, we use the Rallying Standard, then we apply seppuku. We use the Blood Boil perfume, and let's make sure that all the damage is going up and the buffs are applying. And then finally, we use the Raw Dumpling to poison yourself, get the damage buff, and then cleanse it right away. You can see the damage went from 556 to 1320, and that is without the successive attack talisman. Against bosses and multiple enemies, the successive attack talismans can raise your damage up to 2100, and that's on the Saint Trina weapons, the Sleep Swords. And we start at 556, that's almost 4 times the damage. It's hard to stop and look at your stats, but as long as you're hitting, your stats are going to be going up, and you can notice that your damage is going to almost like double after like 1 or 2 hits. So imagine taking all these buffs and applying it on a weapon that has a higher base damage, or a weapon that has a certain scaling with dex or strength. You can probably end up with like 3,000 or 4,000 damage easily. Or combining weapons with like blood loss or frostbite to inflict heavier damage. If you don't have one of the successive attack talismans, either use the claw talisman for jump attacks, or use one of the talismans that increase your damage when your HP is full or low, or combine it with any talisman that increases your sorceries or incantations. You can always modify some of the steps. For example, you can swap the Raw Dumpling and seppuku and use weapons that apply both poison and bleed against your enemies. Also, don't forget that you can use the Golden Vow incantation over Rallying Standard weapon buff if you can't keep track of all your buffs, because the Golden Vow actually lasts longer than the Rallying Standard. But usually, like when you apply all these buffs, like the bosses will die in like 2 or 3 hits. You can also put Knight's Resolve Ash of War on your weapons, but it's not as good as it was prior to this patch. Here's a comparison. This was before, I could actually hit like 6300 damage per weapon. And this is how it is now. In the end, you can use this guide for PvE or PvP to buff your bows, ballistas, spell, cannons, or any weapon you want to use. You don't really have to do all the steps. Choose the ones that you feel comfortable with, or the ones that are available to you. Hopefully this helps you in your adventure. Thank you, and I'll see you all.